I've never been the type to accept stories without questioning them, especially when they involve supernatural explanations or ancient tales of divine destruction. I always thought the conquest of Canaan by the Israelites was just another brutal chapter in history. A conflict like so many others, but what I witnessed with my own eyes made me realize that some things can't be explained with facts and dates alone. It all began when I was invited to join an archaeological expedition to a little explored site, an ancient Canaanite settlement that wasn't listed in any tourist guides or well-known books. The invitation came from a renowned professor, someone who had dedicated his life to studying ancient civilizations. I accepted without hesitation, thinking it would just be another academic trip, another set of ruins to analyze. I never expected to find anything that strayed from the ordinary, let alone something that would make me question reality itself. But from the moment we arrived, I felt that something about the place was different. The air was thick, heavy, as if it carried the weight of a history that refused to die. The silence wasn't the usual silence you encounter in archaeological sites. It was thick and suffocating, as though something invisible was watching us. Our group was small, just a few experienced researchers and some students. But even in the daylight, there was an unsettling feeling in the air. The local guide greeted us with an expression that made my skin crawl. He was different from the other guides I'd met during my travels. He spoke little, and when we mentioned the exact location we were headed to, his face hardened. He hesitated before continuing, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Then, almost as if forced, he muttered, "Get back before the sun sets." It wasn't a suggestion, nor was it a warning. It was a command, delivered in a tone that made it feel like the land itself was telling us to leave. We all shrugged it off at first. We were scholars, after all, not superstitious tourists, but that strange sentence lingered in the back of my mind, gnawing at me. When we finally reached the site, I started to notice that this place wasn't like the others I had visited. The stones were weathered, yes, but not by time. It felt as if something had eroded them, something beyond the usual wear and tear of centuries. There was an odd reddish tint to the ground that seemed out of place. At first, I thought it was just a mineral effect, perhaps iron-rich soil, but as I looked closer, I realized it was more than that. It wasn't rust, nor was it simply earth colored by minerals. No, it felt like something deeper, something that didn't belong. The ground seemed stained. As we walked deeper into the site, the atmosphere grew even heavier. The sense of unease that had been building in me turned into something more palpable, like a weight pressing on my chest. The ruins were vast, far larger than I had expected, but there was an odd quiet to them, as though they had been abandoned for a reason. I could almost feel the history in the air, but it was a history I wasn't sure I wanted to uncover. The further we went, the more I noticed strange carvings on the stones. They weren't the usual symbols of ancient peoples. They were grotesque, distorted faces, twisted figures, and shapes that looked almost human, yet not quite. It was as if the artist had been trying to represent something beyond human understanding. At that moment I felt a chill run down my spine. It wasn't just the wind or the cold of the stones. It was something deeper, like the land itself was pushing back against us. The professor, who had been unusually quiet up until then, suddenly stopped and motioned for us to gather around. "There are things here," he whispered, his voice low, almost reverent. "Things we aren't meant to understand." It wasn't like him to speak this way. He was a man of reason, of logic. But something had changed in him since we'd arrived. His face was pale, his hands trembling slightly as he pointed to a series of stone altars. "These," he continued, his voice shaking, "were used for rituals. Rituals that were beyond anything we would call acceptable." The word sacrifice hung in the air, unspoken, but everyone knew what he meant. As we stood there, I could almost hear the whispers of the past, faint and eerie, like they were trying to tell us something. But whatever it was, I didn't want to know. It wasn't until we came across the central altar that the true horror of the sight began to sink in. The altar was massive, made of dark stone with strange runes etched deeply into its surface. What made it even more disturbing were the remnants around it. Burnt offerings, charred bones, and what appeared to be the remnants of human remains. I stepped closer, my heart pounding, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in my stomach. I've read about these practices in books, heard about them in lectures, but nothing could have prepared me for the reality of it. There was something deeply unsettling about seeing it in person, as if the altar itself had absorbed all the pain and suffering of those who had been sacrificed upon it. It felt wrong, like it shouldn't exist in this world. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all, but nothing made sense anymore. The guide, who had been silent up until that moment, suddenly spoke. "This is where the children were. Offered," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. It took a moment for the weight of his words to hit me. The children. I turned away quickly, nausea rising in my throat. I didn't want to think about what it meant, but the image of innocent lives being sacrificed on that altar wouldn't leave my mind. The others in the group stood frozen, their faces pale and expressionless, each of us grappling with the overwhelming sense of dread that had descended upon us. We hadn't even noticed that the sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the site, as if the land itself was preparing for something. The guide, sensing our hesitation, began to lead us back, but he kept glancing nervously over his shoulder. It wasn't just the fading light that unnerved him. It was something else, something in the air. We hadn't gotten far when we heard it. At first, it was a low hum, so faint I thought it was just the wind. But then it grew louder, a soft, almost melodic sound coming from somewhere deep within the ruins. It was unsettling, unnatural. It wasn't music or chanting. It was something else, something that felt like it was coming from the earth itself. The guide stopped abruptly, his eyes widening in fear. He raised a hand to silence us, his face ghostly pale. "It's them," he whispered. "The spirits of those who were sacrificed. They never left." I could feel my skin crawl as the sound grew louder, almost as if it was reaching for us. It wasn't a sound we should have been hearing in the physical world. It felt ancient, primal, as though the land was alive with something that had been waiting for centuries to awaken. The professor, who had been a staunch skeptic, looked like he might faint. His eyes were wide, his hands trembling as he clutched his notebook, as if trying to ground himself in reality. "This is impossible," he muttered, his voice shaking. "There's no logical explanation for this." But even he seemed to sense it now, the same chilling presence that had begun to wrap itself around us, suffocating any sense of normalcy. We began to walk faster, but the sound seemed to follow us, echoing from all directions, surrounding us. The guide moved ahead of us, his steps frantic now, his breathing shallow. "We need to leave now," he urged, "before it's too late." I didn't need any more convincing. My instincts were screaming at me to get out, to run, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. We finally reached the edge of the site, but as we turned to leave, something stopped us. The ground beneath our feet seemed to tremble, faint at first, but growing stronger with every passing second. It was like the earth itself was shaking, a low rumble that didn't come from any storm or quake. The guide turned to us, his eyes wild with terror. "It's happening," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the growing rumble. "It's calling." I didn't understand what he meant, but I didn't need to. The air had thickened, and the sky was darkening unnaturally fast. The sun had only just dipped below the horizon, but the shadows were stretching in ways they shouldn't. The land around us seemed to shift, the ruins rising up like twisted silhouettes, as if they were alive. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a figure, barely a silhouette against the darkening sky. It was moving toward us, its shape indistinct, but somehow familiar. My heart skipped a beat, and I couldn't breathe for a moment. It was tall, unnaturally so. and as it stepped into the dim light, I could see that its features weren't fully human. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, like they were hollowed out, empty. I heard a gasp from one of the students, and then the figure stopped. It didn't move. It just stood there, watching us with a gaze that pierced through everything I thought I knew. My mind screamed for us to run, but my body wouldn't obey. The air was too thick, the presence too overwhelming. We were trapped. The figure remained motionless, but the air around us was electric, charged with a sense of dread I couldn't escape. My heart was pounding in my chest, my mind racing to make sense of what I was seeing. But nothing about it made sense. Every instinct I had screamed at me to turn around and run, but I couldn't. I couldn't look away from those hollow, glowing eyes. It felt like they were pulling me in, like the figure was reading my thoughts, my every fear, and then it moved. Slowly, deliberately, its steps heavy, each one echoing in the silence. I thought I saw its mouth twist into something like a smile, but it wasn't a smile. It was something more sinister. A grin stretched across its face, and for the first time I realized it wasn't alone. From the shadows, more figures emerged, stepping out of the ruins, their movements slow and deliberate, each one as tall and unnatural as the first. They were no longer human. Their features were twisted, distorted, beings that didn't belong to this world, but somehow had a claim over it. Panic surged through me, and I turned to the guide, desperate for answers, but he was no longer there. I glanced around, but the others were frozen in place, their eyes locked on the figures, as though they too were caught in some invisible force. I tried to speak, but my voice felt trapped in my throat. What was happening? The guide had warned us, and I had brushed it off, thinking it was just superstition. But now, as I stood in that cursed place, I realized there was nothing supernatural about this. These beings, these spirits, whatever they were the remnants of something that had been left behind, trapped in time. They had been waiting for us, waiting for the moment when the land would awaken again. I don't know how much time passed in that moment. It felt like hours, but it could have been mere seconds. My thoughts were scattered, my body trembling. I could hear the low, haunting hum growing louder again, coming from the figures, no, from the land itself. It was like the ground was alive with their presence, each step they took reverberating in the pit of my stomach. The professor, who had been the first to regain his composure, finally spoke, his voice shaking but urgent. "We need to get out of here, now." But as he turned to lead us, it was already too late. The path we had taken was gone. The sight, the landscape, had shifted in ways I couldn't explain. The once clear trail was now a maze of ruins and twisted stone, as if the land had reformed itself to trap us in. Every direction we looked seemed to lead deeper into the shadows, and the figures, no, the spirits, were closing in around us. We were no longer in control. The land had claimed us. Desperation took hold of me. My mind screamed for us to break free, to run, but my feet wouldn't move. I was paralyzed by a force far stronger than fear. I looked at the others, and their faces mirrored my own terror, wide-eyed, pale, and frozen in place. One of the students whispered something, but the words were lost in the thickening air. The figures weren't just watching us anymore. They were circling, slowly, deliberately, as if waiting for us to make the next move. The closer they got, the more the air seemed to tighten around me. I felt like I couldn't breathe. The world around us had become distorted, unreal, like we were no longer part of the world we knew. We were in a place outside of time, where nothing made sense, and everything was governed by ancient forces we could not understand. And then, without warning, one of the figures reached out, its hand stretching impossibly long toward us. The others didn't react, but I felt its touch. It was cold, colder than anything I had ever experienced, colder than death itself. The cold from that touch seemed to seep into my bones, freezing me in place. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It felt like something was pulling me down, like the earth was opening beneath me, ready to swallow me whole. My vision blurred, and I heard the whispers again, faint at first, but growing louder, more insistent. The words were ancient, unintelligible, and yet, somehow, I understood them. They were speaking in the language of the damned, of those who had been sacrificed to the land long ago. The words weren't comforting. They were a warning, a curse, a command. I couldn't decipher them completely, but I understood the message they carried. We were intruders. We had disturbed something that was never meant to be disturbed, and now we were going to pay the price. With every ounce of willpower I had left, I broke free from the paralyzing grip of fear. My legs finally moved, and I turned ready to run, but the landscape had shifted again. The figures had closed in around us, cutting off any escape. There was no way out, no way to go back. We were trapped in a maze of ruins that had become a living nightmare. The sky was now pitch black, and the moon hung unnaturally low, casting long, twisted shadows across the ground. I could see the other figures now. They were circling us, their movements slow but deliberate, each step heavy with intent. They were drawing closer, their eyes glowing with that same unnatural light. I could feel them, could feel their presence in every fiber of my being. We were no longer in the real world. We were in the realm of the lost, the cursed, and the forgotten. The tension in the air was suffocating. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, a frantic rhythm that matched the panic flooding my body. Every instinct screamed at me to fight back, to run, but I knew there was no escape. We were in the grip of something ancient, something beyond our understanding. As the figures closed in, I could see their faces more clearly, if you could even call them faces. They were hollow, eyes glowing with a light that seemed to drain the very color from the world around us. Their skin was grey, almost lifeless, and their features were grotesque, as if they had been distorted by time itself. I tried to scream, to call out to the others, but my voice was swallowed by the thick, oppressive silence that surrounded us. We were alone now, isolated from everything we knew. The land had claimed us, and there was no escape. Then, just as I thought it was all over, the ground beneath us trembled again. But this time, it wasn't just the earth shaking, it was a sound, a deep, guttural growl, like the roar of something that had been sleeping for millennia, waking for the first time. The figures stopped in their tracks, their heads snapping toward the source of the noise, as if they were being called. A flash of light illuminated the ruins for a split second, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw something emerge from the shadows, something far larger, far more terrifying than the figures that surrounded us. It was a silhouette, too large to comprehend, and its presence seemed to consume the very air. It was as if the land itself was alive, and it had summoned something from its depths, something that had been waiting to claim us all. I could feel it now, the presence of something ancient, something evil that had always been here, hidden beneath the ruins, waiting to rise again. The figure in the shadows was unlike anything I had ever seen. It wasn't fully visible, but its outline was enough to freeze me in place. It was massive, towering over us like a nightmare made flesh. Its shape distorted, shifting as if it couldn't fully exist in our reality. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, as the ground beneath us continued to tremble. The other figures, the spirits, they were no longer just watching us. They were bowing, kneeling, as if offering tribute to this monstrosity. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. My throat was dry, and the air felt thick, like I was choking on the very essence of the land. The growling sound grew louder, almost deafening, as the silhouette stepped forward, its presence pressing down on us with an overwhelming weight. I wanted to look away, to run, but I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were glued to the ground. It was as if the land itself had shackled me to this place. Then, just as quickly as it had started, everything stopped. The growling ceased, the trembling of the earth faded, and the figure in the shadows disappeared into the darkness. The air felt normal again, but the silence was deafening. I could hardly process what had just happened, what I had just witnessed. It didn't make sense. It couldn't. And yet deep down, I knew that what we had encountered was real. That thing, whatever it was, had been waiting for us. The spirits, the figures, the altar. It had all been part of something much bigger, something far older than any of us had realized. The guide, who had been watching us in silence, finally spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's over, but you have seen it now. You've disturbed something that should never have been disturbed." His words sent a chill through me, but they weren't just a warning. They were a sentence. We stumbled away from the site, each of us lost in our thoughts, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The air felt thin, as if the weight of the experience had pressed down on us, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed us. It was like the land itself had marked us, as if we were now part of its twisted history, forever tied to whatever ancient forces lay buried beneath that cursed ground. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see those glowing eyes, but there was nothing. The ruins were silent, lifeless once again, but I knew better than to believe it was truly over. Whatever we had witnessed, whatever we had disturbed, it was still there, lingering in the shadows, waiting for the next chance to strike. I could feel it in my bones. When we returned to our hotel, no one spoke. We all went straight to our rooms, as if the mere act of acknowledging what had happened would somehow make it more real. The professor locked himself in his room, and the guide, who had been so certain of his warnings, never spoke another word to us. It was as if the experience had drained the life from him, leaving nothing behind but a hollow shell. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind, felt like a threat. I kept seeing those eyes in my mind, those twisted faces. They wouldn't let me go, and I knew that they were out there, still watching, still waiting. Whatever ancient curse we had awakened, we had only scratched the surface. The land had shown us its true nature, and there was no going back. The next morning, everything seemed normal. The sun was shining, the town bustling as usual, but I couldn't shake the unease in my stomach. It felt wrong, as if the world had shifted overnight, and I was no longer part of it. I tried to push the feeling aside, to go about my day, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw those figures again. The whispers echoed in my mind, their ancient words haunting me. I couldn't escape it. The others seemed to have moved on, at least outwardly. But I knew they were feeling the same dread that I was. The professor avoided looking anyone in the eye, and the students stayed in their rooms, speaking in hushed tones whenever they did interact. The guide, however, was nowhere to be found. It was like he had vanished overnight. No one spoke of it. No one acknowledged what we had witnessed, but I could see it in their eyes, the same terror that I felt. We were marked. That night, I decided to leave. I couldn't stay there any longer, couldn't stay in that place where the line between reality and nightmare had blurred. I packed my things quickly, my hands trembling as I moved. As I made my way out of the hotel, I thought I saw someone watching me from the corner of my eye, standing just outside the door. But when I turned to look, there was nothing there. My heart raced as I hurried out, but as I stepped onto the empty street, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I spun around, but again, no one was there. I was alone, but the weight of that ancient presence, the force that had followed us back, was suffocating. I rushed to the bus station, desperate to leave the town behind. The closer I got to the bus, the heavier the air seemed to grow. It felt like something was closing in on me, suffocating me with every step I took. The sun was setting, casting long, dark shadows that seemed to stretch farther than they should. I glanced around, half expecting to see the figures again, but there was nothing. just the quiet, empty streets. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That presence was still there, lurking just out of sight, always a step behind me. I got on the bus as quickly as I could, practically throwing myself into a seat, desperate to get away from the town, from the cursed land. But as the bus pulled away, I looked out the window, and I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, standing at the edge of the road, was a figure, one of them. It wasn't as clear as it had been in the ruins, but I knew it was one of the spirits. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dark, and for a moment I thought I saw it smile. That grin stretched across its face, wide and predatory, like it had been waiting for me to leave. As the bus pulled away, the figure slowly faded into the shadows, but I knew it was still there, watching, waiting. I couldn't escape it. No matter where I went, it would follow. We had awoken something ancient, something that would never let go. The ride was long, and I tried to push the thought of that figure out of my mind, but it kept creeping back. Every bump in the road felt like a warning. Every stoplight, every turn seemed to carry a weight, as though something was shifting in the world, as though I was being pulled back toward that place I had tried to escape. I thought I saw faces in the reflection of the window, distorted faces, eyes glowing, but every time I turned to look, there was nothing there. Just the endless stretch of road. I tried to focus on anything but the fear that clung to me, but I couldn't. That presence, that ancient, unrelenting presence had followed me. It wasn't just tied to that town or those ruins. It was tied to me now. I had felt it in the depths of my soul, and now it was a part of me. Impossible to escape. When I finally reached home, I thought maybe things would go back to normal. Maybe the land would let go. Maybe the fear would dissipate. But as I stepped into my apartment, I felt it immediately. The air was thick again. The same suffocating feeling I had experienced in the ruins. It was as though the very walls of my home had become part of that cursed place. I tried to shake it off, to convince myself I was imagining things. But then I heard it. A whisper, faint at first, but unmistakable. It was the same language I had heard in the ruins, the same ancient words. I couldn't understand them, but I knew what they meant. The land had claimed me, and there was no escape. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the whispers, soft but relentless. They came from all directions, as if the very walls were alive, pressing in on me. My mind was unraveling. The figure, the presence, it was with me now, more real than ever. I couldn't tell if I was awake or if I was trapped in some twisted dream. I tried to block it out, to bury myself in my work, in anything that could distract me, but it followed me everywhere. The faces, the glowing eyes, the distorted grins, they were always there, lurking in the corners of my vision. Sometimes I could feel a cold hand on my shoulder, but when I turned, nothing was there. I couldn't escape. And then, one night I saw it, right there, standing at the foot of my bed. That same figure, with its hollow eyes, its twisted grin. It whispered my name, and I felt a chill run through me that froze me to the core. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I was trapped in its gaze, unable to break free. I don't know how long I lay there, paralyzed by fear. But when I finally gathered the strength to turn away, it was gone. But it wasn't over. I could feel it now, deep in my bones. It wasn't just a nightmare, not just some hallucination. It was real, and it was never going to leave me. The land had claimed me, and no matter how far I ran, no matter how hard I tried to forget, it would follow me. The figures, the whispers, the growls, they were part of me now. I had been marked, and nothing in this world could change that. Wherever I went, they would be there, watching, waiting. And the worst part? I don't think I'm the only one. I think it's still out there in the shadows, waiting for the next person to disturb it, waiting for the next fool to awaken it from its slumber. And when they do, it will consume them, just like it consumed me. I thought I could outrun it. I tried to flee from the memories, to escape the relentless weight that followed me, but the harder I tried, the more it seemed to close in on me. I couldn't even go outside without feeling its presence, lurking just beyond the veil of reality, watching my every move. There were moments when I'd be walking down the street, and I would catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, just a fleeting shadow, or a figure standing too still. In the distance, it was always there, just waiting for me to notice, to acknowledge its existence. The whispers started coming at night again, growing louder, more frantic, until I couldn't even distinguish my own thoughts from the voices that bombarded my mind. I had become their prisoner, trapped in a world where the line between the real and the supernatural had completely dissolved. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. The whispers were deafening, louder than they had ever been. They filled my mind, choking off any rational thought. The cold that I had felt in the ruins had returned, seeping into my skin, freezing me from the inside out. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. And then I saw it again. That same figure standing at the foot of my bed, but this time it was different. The air around it crackled with an energy I couldn't understand, something dark and ancient. The figure's eyes glowed brighter, the grin wider, more grotesque. And then it spoke, not in whispers, but in a voice that boomed in my skull, a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. "You disturbed us. Now, you belong to us." Those words, those chilling words, tore through my sanity, leaving me broken and trembling. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something inside me had changed. I felt disconnected from the world around me, like I was walking through a fog, unable to grasp anything real. Everything felt distant, like a dream that I couldn't wake up from. The figure's voice echoed in my mind every waking moment, each word more haunting than the last. I tried to tell myself I was just imagining it, that the stress had gotten to me, but deep down, I knew better. I wasn't imagining it. I had seen it with my own eyes. I had disturbed something that should never have been disturbed. And now, there was no escaping it. No matter how far I ran, no matter how many places I tried to hide, it would always be there, just beyond the surface, waiting to claim me completely. I started seeing things more clearly now. The world around me wasn't just dark, it was changing. The shadows seemed to shift on their own, moving in ways they shouldn't. Faces would appear in the reflections of windows or mirrors, only to vanish when I turned to look. People I passed on the street would glance at me with a look of recognition, but there was something off about their eyes, something I couldn't place. I began to wonder if it was only me who saw it, or if the land had reached out and touched everyone, pulling them into its grasp. I couldn't tell anymore. Everything was slipping away. I was losing myself. And with every passing day, it felt like the figure was growing stronger, its grip on me tightening. I could hear it calling to me, its voice now a constant hum in the back of my mind. "You belong to us. There's no end to this. Not for me. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. The world around me is no longer mine. The whispers, the figures, the presence, they have consumed me. I'm just a shadow now, a husk of the person I used to be, walking through a reality that isn't real anymore. Maybe I'm already dead. Maybe I died that night in the ruins, and this is my punishment. Or maybe I'm just waiting for it all to end, but I know one thing for certain: the land has claimed me, and I will never escape it. It will follow me into the depths of my mind, into the farthest corners of my soul. It will never let me go. And when it's done with me, it will move on to the next fool, the next person who dares to awaken what should have remained buried.